Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation here tonight. Next week, we will not have this class. Next Thursday, we will not have this class because I'll be teaching boot camp next week. Okay, I always like to share what I do to help people grow their gardens or their farms or whatever. Everything I do is based on principles. So if you have a 10,000 acre farm, the things I teach will work. If you have a little tiny pot with one plant in it, the things I teach work. Anything between those two work because it's all based on soil health. Now, the way you do it obviously is going to be a little bit different, but I do focus on gardening, mostly larger gardens, something like an acre. So pretty big gardens is kind of where I focus my efforts. But I do have a YouTube channel. I have our free Q&A, which is what this class is. I have a Patreon. $8 a month gets you access to over 500 videos and articles of how to grow food. And then I have my 17-week class that I teach in the summertime. I'm a soil lab. You can send me your soil samples. And I'm available for consulting if you're doing a farm startup or if you're not making money on your farm and you need to figure out how to become profitable. I help people become profitable by cutting out expenses that they don't need. The number one expense right now in agriculture is fertilizer. The number two expense is fuel. And the number three expense is labor. And by following the correct soil health principles, we can cut a lot of those things, at least get them lower and eventually cut them completely out. A lot of them, not labor. You still have to work. And then boot camp. Boot camp is next week. So, and I still have room for a couple of people. So if you want to come to boot camp, contact me and we can get you in. And then my book, I'm still painstakingly working on my book. It's written, but I'm trying to edit it. Tonight we're going to talk about the rhizosphere. So on this slide, I put in the 6 spheres of the soil. In earlier classes, because I've been teaching this stuff for years, but in earlier classes, I used to teach the 5 spheres of the soil. But one of the leading soil scientists in the world, his name is Ray Archuleta, he added in a 6th one, and he put it as number 1, which is the phyllosphere. And that means the leaves of the plants that grow bacteria on them. And we mean beneficial bacteria when I'm talking about that. And without those bacteria, the soil does not function properly because the bacteria that live on the leaves interact with the bacteria in the soil. So he added that, which is brilliant and good that we have that understanding now. But tonight's short class will be about number 5, which is the rhizosphere. Rhizo means root, and sphere is just obviously these are the 6 spheres. So the rhizosphere, we are going to be looking at the sphere of the roots, what they do, and what they look like. Mostly what they look like, so that when you take your shovel out there and you dig in the ground, if you dig up a tree root or a vegetable or a weed or alfalfa or grass, I don't care what it is, if it has roots, they should have a rhizosheath on them. And I have pictures of that, and so let's look at those right now. I have 4 plants here on this picture. Hopefully you can see my cursor here. This little plant is it's just a random weed. I don't even know what species it is. I'm looking here. I can't even remember when I took this picture, but it was just a random weed. It might be something edible actually, but we will ignore this one for this class. The middle one is a daikon radish, and some people call these driller radishes. There's different strains of these. Excuse me. By strains, I mean different varieties of the daikon radish. So they're all daikon radishes, but there's different types that have been bred to do different things. And some plant breeders have bred them to drill holes deep into the ground and punch through hard pans. A hard pan is just a compacted soil. So this one, all these plants were growing in my greenhouse, and I dug them up, took a picture. This was about a year ago when I took these pictures. It was right before I gave my speech at the Soil Health in the West conference, and I took this slide, and we looked at this during that class. But this daikon radish is big, it's fat, it's deep, and if you look towards the bottom here, you can see the bulk of it stops right there, but that little tiny root keeps going down. Now that little root can go a long ways. I've never measured those, and I have never read anything from a researcher who's measured this little root going down, but I've seen them as when you pull these up as long as 4 inches, and then they break off. So it would be fantastic to get a backhoe out and to dig down in the ground and be and very carefully look at these roots and take this root out like almost like an archaeologist with a little brush, and you're just very gently removing soil until this becomes microscopic, and see how long those are. That would be a fantastic thing to do, because what's happening is this root, these can go down in the soil a good foot easily. This one's not that big, but a lot of the radishes I've grown like this can go down in the soil a foot, and then they hit this point where I'm pointing with the cursor there, and then this keeps going. Well, a lot of the ones that I've pulled, it has that little root on it that's about 4 inches long, and then it breaks off. But that extra length going down is really big. To a microbe, that is a gigantic canyon. To water infiltrating, that is a huge place for water to get in, for air to go down in. That's a lot of room for air to get in. So even though it looks insignificant and little right there, when we start thinking microbes in the soil, they give us fertility. That's really important to think about, those tiny roots going down. So I don't know, maybe, I mean, wouldn't it be great if this could penetrate 4 feet? I don't think they go that deep, but if your root went a foot, maybe a foot and a half, and then this one went another 2 or 3 feet, you know, I mean, I don't know. That'd be fantastic to get holes drilled in the ground that much to let in oxygen, which is our most important nutrient in the soil. And then we need, you know, and then it would let in all the other stuff too, microbes, plant nutrients, water. So that would be great. So let's look at this one now. This is cereal rye, and this, don't confuse this with ryegrass. There's a lot of different plants out there that are called rye. What you're looking for, if you want to plant this, is cereal rye, meaning it's the rye that you would make grain out of. You could cut the grain and make bread, whatever. So you're looking for rye. Like there's annual ryegrass, there's perennial ryegrass. That's not what we're talking about. This is cereal rye, different species. A lot of people make that mistake, so I'm trying to clarify that. But this, these roots are fibrous roots, but one rye plant can have hundreds, like 300 miles of roots. And I've read a recent article that said that's just the big roots, and if you added up all the hair roots, it'd be thousands of miles. So that is pretty crazy to me, to think that there's that much root mass in the soil from that plant. But I think the rye plant, that cereal rye, has the most root mass of any common plant we're going to be growing in our gardening or our farming ventures. And it's easy to grow. It grows in the wintertime. It's easy to terminate in the spring. Well, not early spring, late spring, early summer, when it heads out, and when the pollen comes out on the head, you can roll or crimp that down, and then you can plant stuff right in it, and it kills it so that it feeds the soil. So what we have here, we have the taproot here in the daikon radish, and we have the fibrous root here. And so you always want to have taproots and fibrous roots growing together, because they will make your soil better. Now this third plant over here that we're going to talk about, this is the hairy vetch. And I put the paper here so that you can see this here, because, and then there's a close-up on the next slide that shows this better. So here we have a grass, and then we have a radish, and then we have a legume. Hairy vetch is a legume, and so legumes will help to get nitrogen in the soil. And for years and years, probably 100 years, everybody's been saying how important legumes are because they will put nitrogen in your soil. And that is true, but it's not as important as we thought. You don't have to have legumes as thickly planted as we used to think. What we need in the soil that we don't often have is carbon. Carbon is more important to have in the soil than trying to collect nitrogen to put in the soil, because we can get enough nitrogen in the soil without the legume if we have enough carbon in the soil, because the bacteria will convert nitrogen that's not available to plants into available forms of nitrogen if we have enough carbon. If we don't have enough carbon, you better be growing legumes. So I'm going to the next slide here. So here's our close-up of that same hairy vetch plant, and you can see that the roots are entirely covered with soil, and that soil is glued on to those roots. Now, this is what a healthy soil looks like. If you have a soil that when you dig up a plant and you look at the roots, if your soil is not clinging to the roots like this, you don't have a healthy soil. Now, let me be clear about this. This is not what they taught us when I went to agronomy school in college. They taught us the opposite. In horticulture school, agronomy school, they were teaching the same stuff. I heard that in the third class too. It was just the common plant science class. So if you're just going to college to do whatever, you need a science in your first 2 years. You could take biology, most people did, or you could take plant science. Well, I was going into horticulture and agronomy, so I took the plant science class. And in that class, they said when you dig up roots, they should be nice and white. You should not have any color on them. They should be clean and white. That's a healthy root, which is false, but we didn't know it at that time. I took a plant propagation class for greenhouses, and they told us the same thing in that class. And then I had another class, it was a forage production class, and we talked about different forages, things like alfalfa, and other types of grass, anything that you'd feed cattle. And they told us that the same thing, when you're digging up and looking at roots, they should be nice and clean. Because if you see anything sticking to the root, then you may have some type of a fungus that will cause a rot in your plant. And that was just standard procedure of what they taught. And they're still teaching it today. You get an older professor in some of these colleges, and they're still teaching the same curriculum they taught. But this is the latest science, and this is new. And so it's pretty important that we understand this. So when we when we're looking at these, what is actually happening here and why they're covered with all of the soil on around each of those roots is because the bacteria, most of this is bacteria, a lot of it could be fungal, but they are gluing themselves and the aggregates that they live in. An aggregate is just a bunch of soil particles and organic matter that they've glued together in a little tiny ball. But and all that stuff is glued to each root. The reason that's happening is because the plant is taking in sunlight, so the photon hits the plant leaf and it creates a sugar, and then the sugar grows the plant. So you get stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, seeds from all of the sugars. And of course, most of it is actually made out of carbon from the carbon dioxide in the air, but there's a lot of sugar involved there. But most of the sugar that they make goes down into the roots, and then it leaks out of the roots. We call that an exudate. So it's exudating into the soil. And so it's pumping. I don't know who it was, liquid. I think it was Ray Archuleta or one of those awesome soil scientists, but they said this is liquid sunlight that gets leaked out into the ground. And I always thought that was a fun way to think about it. But all that sugar goes out into the soil and it feeds the microbes. Okay, it's feeding the microbes, and the microbes are being so well fed that they are growing and colonizing right on the roots. And when it comes to fungus, there's two kinds of fungus. Let me be clear. There's thousands of kinds of fungus, beneficial ones, and there's disease causers too. But if you have roots that look like this, you probably are not going to get a disease because all the beneficial microbes are colonizing here, and they're protecting that plant. And so the bad fungus don't have a chance here to grow and to hurt your plant. But there's two groups of these thousands of fungus. There's more than two, but we're only going to talk about two. I know this is getting technical and I'm probably being confusing. I'm sorry. But the ones that are colonizing these roots, there's the endomycorrhizal fungi and the ecto. So endo means they go inside the root, and so that's the endo. The ecto, they colonize the outside of the root. But either way, they can look like this when you just dig up a root and look at it. And you don't need to even know all these fancy words to grow really good food that I'm saying. I'm just trying to tell you the basics of what's happening. So when you go out there with your shovel, you dig up a growing plant. If it looks like this, that is a good thing. If you have beautiful white roots, then that means that your bacteria and fungal colonies are not colonizing the roots, usually because they're not there. So we need to get them there. We need to inoculate the soil with the beneficials so that they're there. Otherwise, we're going to have to feed the plant, and we're going to have to feed it fertilizer. So if you have a plant that's suffering and it needs a shot of fertilizer, if you dig up the roots and they're nice and white, they are starving to death. And that's why it needs fertilizer. How do you know if it needs fertilizer? Well, give it some fertilizer, and if it takes off and starts growing, and in 3 weeks it looks a lot better, then you know that it responded well to the fertilizer, and so you know that your soil isn't working properly. Next slide here. This is the very same plant, but I washed all of the rhizosheath off. And the reason I washed it off so I could get this picture so we can look closely at the nodules. Now I'm going to go back to the previous slide. Now you can see the nodules in here, but it's hard to show you. So here's one right here. You can see that. And then there's a whole line of them right there where my cursor is. And then you can start picking them out on here. If we go to this other plant, there's two big ones here. There's one over here. Well, I just took this to the hose and I just sprayed it off. And then this was the result. And so I've washed off the rhizosheath. Remember, the rhizosheath is the dirt that was on there, that was clear full of beneficial bacteria and fungi. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those two look really little. I'm not going to count those. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe 14 good sized nodules there. So these nodules can be found on your legume plants. And so that's things. A legume is something like a bean or a pea. So I love to grow beans and peas in my garden because you can eat them. They have an edible part to them, and they will significantly help your soil. But you can also use something like hairy vetch, which is not really edible. You could grow clover, again, not really edible. Alfalfa, What else? And there's all kinds of trees that are legumes too. So, there's a big list. You could just go to the internet and do a search on what plants are legumes, and you'll get a list of 100 plants. But when you dig this up with your shovel, we've talked about the shovel test last week. So you go out there and you dig up a legume plant, like a clover or whatever, and you're looking at the roots. If it has these nodules on it, that is a good thing. It's trying to make nitrogen. Now, what you want to do is you want to take your finger and you want to smash one of these little things. And if it's white or pink on the inside, it's not making nitrogen. It needs to be red. It needs to be blood red. It needs to look the same color as if you cut yourself and blood is dripping. So that's how you know if it is making high amounts of nitrogen, is if it is red. A lot of people don't know that. And it's information that somehow it has been secret to a lot of people. So talk to, I don't know, not thousands, but probably over 100 people, maybe 300 people over the years. And we've talked about this, and nobody seems to know how to tell if they're actually making nitrogen. A lot of people say, oh, if the nodules are there, they're doing it. That's not true. When you break that nodule open, and they're not hard to break, they're soft. They're a lot softer than the root itself. And so when you just squish it between your fingers and kind of smash it, it should be blood red. So, and if it is, then it's making nitrogen. So that is just a little review of what we're doing here. Let's just go back and look at these pictures again. Again, we talked about the rhizosphere tonight and why that matters. You want to focus on the fibrous roots and tap roots and legumes. And you should have something like that growing all the time. So let's just excuse me, I can't get over this cold. I've had it for a month. Let's just think for a second. So if you're growing a field of corn, let's just say you're a gardener and you want to have a bunch of corn, so you're going to have a corn patch. I don't care how big it is. Let's just say you have 10 rows of corn that are 50 feet long, and you're spreading, and your rows are 3 feet apart. That's a pretty standard way to grow corn. And in the row, you're going to plant a corn every foot. So how are you going to get all of these roots in that cornfield? Well, think about the corn. Is it a legume? No, it's not. Is it a taproot? No, it's not. Is it a fibrous root? Yes, it is. Corn is in the grass family, and it is a fibrous root. So there you go. You have your fibrous roots. What could you plant with the corn that would help your soil and not act like a weed to the corn? Well, you could grow carrots. You could grow daikon radishes like this one in the picture. You could grow a lot of things with that corn. You could even, I don't know. There's a lot of options. But if you just put them in there, let's just say that when you plant your corn, put a carrot seed with every corn seed. What's wrong with that? It's not traditional. There's probably not a gardening book saying to do that. But would it be better for your soil? Absolutely. What about a legume in that corn? Well, the American Indians had a thing they called the Three Sisters, where they would grow corn and then some kind of a cucurbit, which would be like a melon or a squash. And then they would also grow beans. So could you grow beans and peas in your corn patch? Absolutely. Why can't you put a corn seed and a pea seed or a bean seed in that garden? I mean, yeah, it sounds like we're breaking the rules. Well, more gardeners need to be breaking rules. Anyway, there's the rhizo sheath. I like this one right here that I'm circling, because you can see all the little bumps of dirt on there. Each one of those little lumps is a colonization of probably, I don't know if millions, but but hundreds of thousands of microbes in each little macro aggregate that's on there. Because in a tablespoon, they say there's a billion. So yeah, there could be millions there, because you know, a million's a small number compared to a billion. So, and then there's our nodules. And we're gonna open this up for questions. The first question is who's coming to boot camp? I think I've gotten 8, 9 people. I like to keep it under 15 for sure, so people get good attention. I had one boot camp where we had 10 people. It was a good number. Everybody was able to have time to actually talk. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And let's ask some questions. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat.
Here's a question. You talked about carbon. And what did you say about carbon? It's more important, you said, I guess what it creates bacteria that leads to nitrogen.
Yeah.
So what am I going to put on my garden that's carbon? Would that be wood chips?
Yes. Wood chips or carbon. If you grow a big bunch of weeds and mow them down and leave them there, that's carbon. If you grow plants that have deep roots, that's carbon. That cereal rye picture that I showed you, it'll get 4 feet tall on the top of the ground. And underground, it has the most massive fibrous root system of any plant that I know of. And it'll grow in your climate. So it puts a massive amount of carbon in the soil as roots, and then when they die, they decompose. And it puts a lot of carbon in the soil because of the sugars that it's pumping in while it's growing. And then when you mow it down or roll or crimper it down, that adds carbon. So any plant material, compost, wood chips, that's how you get the carbon. The most beneficial carbon that you're going to get in the ground is by growing grasses. In a home gardening situation, we don't collect as much carbon as we can in a grassland that has a combination of cold season and warm season grasses. So that's a little bit, you know, I don't know that you would really do that because those are perennial grasses. Think of the 50 states where the buffalo used to run, you know, and most of North America used to be a grassland. At least, I mean, much of Canada is forest, and historically it has been, and it still is. But most of the 48 states, grassland, you know. So when we come to a gardening context, we have to deal with wood chips and compost and that kind of stuff. It's mostly what we're gonna do. Unless you have a herd of cattle, John.
Yeah, unless we got some cattle, all right.
Yeah, I don't know if the HOA would go with that.
How about chickens? Would that do it?
The HOA will go with that.
Chickens would get lost in 8-foot tall grass.
Oh, there we go.
Well, they could hide from the owls and in the predatory birds.
That's right.
There you go. William, you said that when you strip the nodule, and if it's pink or white, what do you do then? What do you do to that plant so that it will eventually be red?
Okay, so you need to inoculate your soil with the microbes that will create the nitrogen. So when we're talking about growing a legume, you need a bacteria called rhizobium, and you can buy inoculant from just gardening places. that's, but it's a little bit different strain, whether you're gonna mix it with like bean seeds or pea seeds. So if you're
Oh,
planting peas, you
when you're
want a different inoculant than if you're planting beans. But you know, a lot of seed companies have it. If they're selling the seed, they usually will sell the inoculant. And then you just mix it up. It's just a powder. It's usually a black powder. And you just mix it up. I don't ever use those though, but it's an easy way to do it. I just make compost. You know, you've been on here enough to hear me scream about compost almost every class I've done.
So if you're picking at your roots and you can see that it's pink or white, you need to give that plant, you can't give it the inoculant because it's already growing, but you need to give it then just compost, which is rich in nitrogen.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then I didn't hear what you were saying. Let's see. Okay. What should we do if it isn't working properly? We're talking about, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. I wrote it down here and I can't read my own writing. Just go on to somebody else. I'll figure it out and ask you again.
All right. Who else has a question? Anybody?
Yeah,
Any
so
questions?
Oh,
we were talking today, when we go to our property, we want to eventually have chickens, but our property has nothing to feed them. It has goat heads and tumbleweeds. So in order to prepare ahead of time, we were talking about planting things that they would be able to graze on or dig about, stuff like that. And so some of these things you've talked about, various legume plants were in the list. So would we just knock down the weeds and I don't know, we were talking about, do we put down the cardboard and start there? Or do we just plant legume seeds of various varieties right in the soil? Or how do we get started so that we'll have a place that we can grow something that chickens can be in?
Okay, so don't do the cardboard trick with anywhere you're growing food for livestock.
Okay.
It's too much. It's too big, you know. You
Mhm.
just use your cardboard and your compost for small garden plots just to get started.
Right.
To grow your, you know, your expensive high dollar vegetables, whatever they are that you want to grow.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, you could do 3 or 4 beds that are 3 feet wide and 50 feet long, just the first year to get started. That'd be a pretty good sized garden. You can produce a lot of food there. So for the chickens, where you just have mostly weedy stuff, that's kind of a good thing, because if you had a grassland already, it's a little bit harder to grow the chicken food.
Mm.
So it's not a bad thing that you have those other plants growing there. So I would just go in there and plant a big patch of like 15, 20 different things. You could call up, there's a place called Utah Seed,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's in Tremont. I don't remember, but anyway, it's up there. It's close to, you know where Tremont, Utah is. It's close to Idaho up there, but
Okay.
but Utah Seed. That's what, I mean, he could make you a mix of,
Mhm.
you know, different things, but just tell him you want like a pasture mix that has a bunch of grain in it,
Okay.
and he could figure that out. But you might just want to write this down real quick. If I was just doing a pasture for chickens, I would
Mhm.
do green beans
Mm-hmm.
and peas,
Mm-hmm.
turnips,
Mm.
kale, collards,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course all your normal cereals. wheat, oats, barley, triticale, rye. So I would get a bag, like you're talking maybe $400 for a giant bag, like a 50-pound bag, like a feed sack of each of these. Okay. And some of them maybe just 20 pounds, whatever. And then get a 5-gallon bucket, mix all these together. So just scoop out 3 or 4 cups of each one and mix them up, and then just go plant that out there all over your property.
Okay.
You're gonna grow a jungle.
Great.
That's what you want to do. And it's gonna be a good thing to do that, because you're gonna get your 4 plant families. I don't know. I probably haven't gone into that since you've been on my classes, but if you want really good pest and disease resistance for whatever, for any plant, then you want a minimum of 4 plant families growing together so that the roots are mingling and touching under the ground. That will grow a maximum amount of beneficial microbes in the ground. And then the microbes will turn on genetics in the plants. And we call that quorum sensing.
Okay.
Quorum, like a group of people, Quoram.
Oh.
And the idea of quorum sensing is that if you get enough different species working together, then their gifts and talents that they have, they will express things that they can't do on their own. So it's a synergistic relationship. But they, and I'm sure that they help each other, but I don't know anything about that research. What I do know is that they help the plants. And then the plants will do a phenomenon called okay, so the quorum sensing happens to the plant, and then the plant creates secondary metabolites.
Okay.
And what that means is that they will have more proteins, more sugars. They often grow faster. They have better colors. And if we're eating those plants, then they have better flavors. And the more secondary metabolites that get turned on in the plant, then the more the bugs and diseases leave the plant alone, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Now we don't need to be spraying toxins all over our foods anymore. I mean, I know a lot of people think that it's a political, leftist political agenda to say that organic food is better or whatever. I don't know, but I don't even get into that, other than the fact that some people stop listening at this point because it sounds weird and crazy. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just telling you the science. I'm just telling you the truth. I mean, you come over here to my greenhouse, and when I have a row of cabbages, and that's all it is, just a bed of cabbages, they start getting aphids and cabbage loopers eating them. But if I have a cabbage planted like every 8 feet apart, and there's 15 or 20 other species in there, and I'm making sure that I have 4 plant families whose roots are mingling, I never get any pest damage on those plants, unless the outer leaves are getting old and they're done anyway, and they're drooping down, they're turning yellow, because that's just what a plant will do. That's the normal life cycle. A leaf only lasts so long, and then they start touching the ground, they start decomposing. That's where we will find these pest creatures, but you don't find it up in the top of the plant, and that's the part we eat anyway. No, I've never seen that. I don't know if that works for all pests, but it certainly works for the ones that causes the most economical damage, like citrus greening in Florida. It's just about wiped out the whole citrus industry in Florida, a few years ago.
Wow.
But the crazy organic farmers that all the major farms laugh at and say, oh yeah, they're just weed patches. Those trees, the plant pathologists have gone there. They tested those trees. Guess what? They have the disease too. But their fruit is ripening and they show no symptoms,
Hmm.
even though they're infected. And all the other farmers, their fruits are just, they never ripen. That's what the disease does.
Wow.
And so
Interesting.
the fruits don't ripen, and they're like, what do we do? And and the reason is the secondary metabolites are not turned on because they don't have enough microbial activity in the soil. And that's because they don't have enough food to live. A species won't live if it doesn't have food. And so they can't live because there's not enough plants growing. Because the normal way to grow citrus is you spray the ground and just keep bare ground everywhere. And then the only plants growing out there are citrus trees. But they need a community of plants underneath so that everything's working right.
So we're going to be on the property second week of February. Is it too early to spread a bunch of seed out then, or do we wait till the first frost? I mean, thaw or last frost?
No, you could go ahead and spread a lot of it out. One thing you need to think about something though. If you have a lot of birds, they might eat all your seed.
Oh, true.
So you may need to be careful with that. I know some of the old timers would say the best way to plant clover and alfalfa was to broadcast it on top of snow because they get good germination. But if you have birds that eat all the seed, they're not going to germinate. I mean, obviously.
Sure.
So you just have to think it through within your own, what's happening.
So that is a really dry farming, is you're throwing out the seed, but you're not watering. We don't have irrigation set. We can't get water any far away. That near the house, the well was serviced, but we can't get out that far. So
yeah, right. Yeah, so you're gonna want to have drought resistant crops. So like all of your cereal grasses, meaning wheat, oats, barley, rye, and triticale, you could plant those. They'll grow without irrigation, and I would plant those early as you can. But the birds like them, so if you have a way to get them down, if the ground's covered with snow, it probably is this year because we're buried with snow right now. We're not that far away, so yeah. If you can figure out a way to get it under the snow.
That's always a shovel.
Okay, well, this is good ideas.
Like a horse, get a herd of cattle, run them through, broadcast your seed and chase 50 cows around in a circle 20 times. That'd do it.
Perfect.
Our neighbors have cattle. We'll just say, open the gate. Go.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you could actually do that, that'd be great, because that would work. But your warm season plants, you don't really want to grow those or plant the seed until 1st of May or whatever, up there, May 15th. And that would be beans and corn. If it freezes and the plant dies, that's what I mean by a warm weather crop. So okay, any more questions? We've got Clint on here and Helena is on here. If you guys have questions, you can unmute and ask, or you can type it into the chat.
Hello, William.
Hello, are you the Clint Fawcett from Laverque, Utah?
Yes, sir, I am.
Yeah, I know you from
Yeah, how you doing, old friend?
Good.
Good. So I got a question, multiple questions, but I'll just start with my main focus is like a 4-acre pasture, which is probably considered very hard packed. And I'm trying to get it to really bloom this year. And I'm wondering when would be the best time for me to get the seed in the ground.
Yeah. So what are you planning on planting? What kind of plant?
Just like a pasture mix or an orchard mix for the horses, which I plan on rotating.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so like anytime, you don't
And,
have, are you still down there in southern Utah? Is that where you're at now?
I'm out of town working, but yes, this is in Laverkin.
Okay, so that's where the property is.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so as soon as the ground's not frozen anymore, that's when I would plant.
Right. Well,
So
we
as-
don't get frozen ground.
Yeah. So as
But-
soon as it thaws out, sometimes that can be in February down there. So
Mhm.
that's coming up soon.
It's super muddy, and I deal with like 30 to 50 wild turkeys on the property as well.
Okay. Do you have any kind of machine that you can get the seed like in the ground? Like a grain drill or a tractor or something?
I do have tractors and discs and mower and that sort of stuff, but just not anything really fancy.
Yeah, okay. So what's growing on there now? Is it just bare dirt or
It is bare dirt because I did disc it out at the end of the season.
okay, yeah. Okay, well, it sounds like you're probably about ready to plant then. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
just get you a mix. They sell lots of different mixes. Do you already have a seed mix that you're planning on planting?
No, I was actually gonna maybe reach out to Utah Seed, like you had mentioned,
Uh-huh.
and get some sort of a custom blend. The previous year, I purchased a pasture blend through Ballard's Nursery.
Yeah, okay.
And I was wondering if I could incorporate some kind of clover into that as well.
Yeah, I would plant like 20 different things. Make whoever you buy the seed from, make them crazy that you're planting so much in one pasture, because
Right.
that's going to make your soil a lot better. In the old days, people would plant like one thing, like a field of orchard grass or a field of alfalfa. But what we're learning now from the soil health world is that the more species you have, the better each crop is going to do. So for
Okay.
a pasture mix, I would want like 15, 20 things. I would want like 7, 8 different kinds of grass, and then I would do 2 or 3 different types of clovers,
Mhm.
and just check with your whatever species you choose. Just make sure you don't have anything that's toxic,
Right.
because certain soil conditions can create toxicities with some of the legumes. Like too many legumes can be a bad thing for certain animals to eat. So just make sure you do your research on those
Okay.
to make sure you're not planting anything that could cause a problem. Horses usually isn't too big of a problem. If you got cattle in there, you can have some digestive issues, and once in a while you can even kill an animal with bloat if you
Ooh.
have
Okay.
too much nitrogen that forms in the clovers or the alfalfa.
Mhm.
So I would go mostly with grasses, different kinds of grass. But certainly get some legumes in there, and even a bunch of the weed species, that are going to drive people crazy. Those can be really good for your soil, but just be careful that you're not planting anything illegal. I mean, obviously,
Right. Had one other quick one, and then I'll let you go. What would you do to deal with like the real pesky weeds, the cockleburs, the bullheads, the nightshade, that sort of thing? Is just mowing? Is that the way to go?
Yep, just mow it. Just
Okay.
keep mowing. Keep mowing, keep mowing.
I
And
think
they'll
that's what
eventually go away as and if you're rotating your horses, you need to be making sure that your grass is growing back enough before you put the horses back in.
Okay.
So you have to rotate them by what the plants are doing and not by the calendar. So if you think, okay, I'm going to put them in here for 8 days and then in that one for 8 days, and then they're coming back every month or whatever, you're probably going to kill out your plants. So you need to go out there and look at your plants and your grass will have, it has leaves on it, you know, the grass stem comes up and then a leaf comes out.
Mhm.
And so when it has 3 leaves coming out, it's ready to regraze again.
Okay,
So that's a good thing to remember.
perfect.
William, I have 2 questions. In your greenhouse, how far apart do you have rows? I know you have a central row that you walk down, but I'm just wondering how far apart we should be planting plants. If we're doing, you know, a smaller, large garden.
So I have 2 major walkways that just make a circle in that greenhouse. And then in the middle of the summer, it's like a jungle. You have to have a machete to get down the pathways. That's actually true. That's not a joke. So I don't know. I like to plant my plants closer together than a lot of people do. If the plant
too.
is staying healthy, I will
Uh-huh.
cram them in there super close.
Okay.
So
Now
I
you
don't
did.
really have rows. I just put stuff in there sporadically.
Oh, fun. Because you said you plant cabbage 8 feet apart, and then you fill everything in between there with at least 4 other varieties or families of plants.
Yeah, so I'll have all kinds of culinary herbs in there. I've got
Uh-huh.
dill, basil. I have pansies and petunias,
Hmm.
sunflowers. Of course, all the edibles: tomatoes, peppers, onions, garlic. So yeah, I've got all that. The one row, it's 3 feet wide and 100 feet long. It's all strawberries, so it's a solid bed of strawberries. But then between each plant, I put a garlic in there.
Oh, good.
So I don't really have 4 plant families growing in there, but they're doing really well right now. If I start getting disease, I may have to do something else, but so far they're doing fine.
Okay, and I didn't hear the tail end of your sentence when you were talking about endo inside root and ecto is outside of the root. And when the root is white, it needs fertilizer, and then you say you feed it fertilizer, and then 3 weeks later, if it's better, it responded. But what if it doesn't respond?
Okay, so let me clarify that. So yeah, it needs fertilizer, but that's not your goal. Your goal is to never fertilize again because fertilizer is expensive. Now, for a home gardener, it's maybe not that expensive, but for 20,000 acres, it's expensive. So I just teach everybody the same thing because it makes our food healthier and tastier. But so if you give it fertilizer, the only reason you want to do that is to test your soil to see if it's working. So if I had 10 plants, I would give every other plant, so 5 plants would get a shot of fertilizer, and then you see if they are growing bigger in 3 or 4 weeks than the ones that didn't get it. And then that tells you that your soil is not working yet. So that's the point of what I was trying to say, which I didn't clarify very good. So I'm glad you asked. Now you've got to realize though, if you're going to grow food, you have to fertilize for the first 3 or 4 years until you wean off of the fertilizer. But it's kind of like a drug addiction. You have to wean off the body, or you go through withdrawals that are awful until you become healthy and you're not dependent again. See, our agricultural soils today are dependent on fertilizer because if I keep fertilizing my plant at recommended rates, like what the bottle says to do, then the microbes that make the plant food will never grow because the plant doesn't need it because it's getting it from you. So we don't want to enable the plant by giving it artificial fertilizers. The plants need to be a little bit hungry for those 3 or 4 years while we are healing our soils so that they will function on their own. Okay, go ahead, Melanie, and ask me some clarifiers about all that so I can answer your real question.
Well, you did. That was great. That's exactly what I wanted to know.
Okay.
And then of course, for fertilizer, we can do teas, right? A fertilizer tea made from compost.
Yeah. Oh, oh. Yes and
Compost.
no. Yes
Oh,
and
okay.
no. Okay, here's the deal. Yes, compost can have plant nutrient in it, but that is not the purpose of compost. And you know, the gardening books, bless their hearts, for 100 years have said compost is plant food. Yeah, you know, most of the time it is plant food, but we don't want to have to make compost for the rest of our lives. Let's make compost and do a really good job at it for 2 years and get our soil functioning and never make it again.
Oh, okay.
Wouldn't it be great if we could live for the next 300 years, never fertilize, never make compost, and our soil simply just functions and grows food all the time? Does that sound too good to be true? It does to
Yeah.
most people, because we have lived in a world where we have to do an amazing amount of labor to grow food. Just because that's our culture, that's how we've done it. But when we go into nature, Mother Nature, and we look at how it produces food, it does it in a way with functioning soils. Now, it doesn't look like human food, but we destroy the mineralizers, mostly fungus, with one tillage. We till that soil and it kills the fungus. And fungus is one of the most important organisms in the soil. So the tillage is killing that. You know, 5 tillage passes in a season, and we usually do that to kill weeds, and yeah, it'll kill weeds, and then it stimulates bacterial growth, and they'll make lots of nitrate, and that wakes up all the seeds for the weeds, and it's an endless cycle. And every year our tractors get bigger and our discs get wider and we spend more money. It's a vicious cycle. And we're at the end of that cycle now. And there are soils, agricultural soils, and the agronomists are scratching their heads saying, I don't know what to do. You can't grow crops here anymore because it's turned into a desert. The most fertile land in the world is that's been being farmed this way for 65, 70 years is unproductive now. That's why the UN and a lot of these government people are so excited about their environmental stuff, is because they are seeing the results of what we've done in modern agriculture, and they don't have an answer for it, and so they're trying to control from a government point of view, which is, you know, let's make a bunch of laws and make people do a bunch of stuff, but they don't have their solutions aren't going to work. I've never seen a solution from government on how to do agriculture that actually works. It doesn't make sense. There's 2 things that happen. You'll get a politician who has an idea that might work, and it needs further debate, but we don't even ever hear about those guys unless you're talking to them face to face. What we really see is that the politicians are just talking, they're being lobbied by the big companies who have another gimmick to sell. And that's where the laws are being made now. So, you know, the Bayer company, they have all these great things to sell farmers, and farmers are buying them, and the government is subsidizing the farmer if they buy it. And so the corporations are getting bigger, they're getting richer, and it's really not fixing the problem. So I mean, a lot of the products work, but it's just another gimmick. And in 20 years it won't be working, probably, because they never have. I mean, just look at fertilizer, you know. Fertilizer has worked, it'll grow plants until you get into it 65 years, and now it's not working. because there's too much salt in the soil, and so they have to come up with new kinds of fertilizer. And so the only thing that the agronomist can now tell the farmer, his recommendation is, well, you're just gonna have to seed it down to grass and grow. It's the only thing it'll grow. It'll probably grow fescue, so plant that and then graze cattle on it. Which is a good recommendation, except for a corn farmer, a soybean farmer, he's not gonna make any money on fescue and cattle. He doesn't own any cattle. He's had to figure out how to grow corn and stay in business. But the monocropping isn't working, and it's because we're destroying our soils. Our soils are not functioning anymore. I almost feel like a trader talking about all this because nobody loves a 300 horsepower tractor as much as I do. But I also understand how the soil works. So, you know.
I got a quick question. So how do we get you a soil sample? If we're going to be up there second week of February, we need to probably grab some soil.
Go to my website,
Okay.
which is georgicrevolution.com. I can share
Okay.
my screen. Let me see if I can. Right there. Can you see my screen? It's on the bottom in blue.
Yes.
Yeah, georgicrevolution.com.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
And then there's instructions on the website. I even have a video. It's kind of long and boring, but it shows you how to take a soil sample. No, you need to remember, when you send me a soil sample, I'm going to be testing for the biology. I'm testing for the life forms in your soil. So I'm not going to test for available nutrients. And that's what the old tests have done. I mean, there's still the tests they use today. They were invented in the 1940s, and we've been using them for nearly 100 years. And they tell us what plant nutrient that is not available in the soil, and then the idea is that you add those nutrients to the soil so that your plants can absorb them.
All right.
But that's not what I do. So I'm going to tell you how. I'm going to give you an approximation of how much bacteria, fungus, beneficial nematodes, and protozoa there is in the soil, and then that will tell you if you have a balanced soil that are going to grow plants. So most soil samples I see from people that are just starting out with a piece of ground similar to what you have explained that your ground is, mostly all I ever see is bacteria. And so what that means is it's in early succession. So it's in the state of kind of like a desert that's growing a few random plants here and there. And so, yeah, so you're in early succession, which means you could probably grow cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, that type of those brassica family. You could grow that without adding very much to your soil, and those will probably grow pretty good. But you got to remember, that's just the soil. If you're buying seed from those plants that were grown in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, that's a completely different climate, absolutely totally different. And so those plants are not adapted to Idaho.
Sure.
So maybe if your plants don't do well, it's not that the soil wasn't good for an early succession plant. It's that those plants didn't know what to do with their genetics. So like, what happened?
Not true.
And that's why I try to teach people how to raise their own seed, because in 4 or 5 generations, you can breed plants that will grow in your climate. They will adapt to your conditions.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, it's been an hour. I think we'll wrap this up. I can take another question, though, if anybody has one that they want to ask. Looks like nobody's talking. So, so good night, everybody. Thank you
Good
for being on.
All right. See you in 2 weeks.
Okay, yes, 2 weeks. No class next week.
Take care.
Good night.